Okay, we're up and running. With no break, post-Hurricane Irma study carries on. We did not even need to skip a class because very, very thankfully, the synagogue was spared any real damage, and we even got power up during the storm. There was like only a small window when power was out in the building. So we are in business, and the business we have is Torah. And we're going to jump right into our parashat. It's a double parashat this week, but we're going to just focus on a section of Nitzavim, chapter 30, which is page 1169. And this is something where, as you'll see from the commentary, we need a little bit of a running jump to get the full idea that's being discussed here. But that's how we're going to do it. Now, since not everyone has returned to class, many I'm sure are still dealing with home crises, that limits our source of reading volunteers. Thank you.
When all these things befall you, the blessing and the curse that I have set before you, and you take them to heart amidst the various nations to which the Lord your God has banished you, and you return to the Lord your God, and you and your children heed his command with all your heart and soul, just as I enjoin upon you this day, then the Lord your God will restore your fortunes and take you back in love.
Pause there real quick. Just want to make sure we've all got the sense of this, right? The beginning of Nitzavim was talking about the calamities that will befall us when we turn away from God. And now in chapter 30, we're talking about the restoration, that there will be a reconciliation, there will be a return from the Israelites towards God, that we will once again be faithful to God and follow Torah. And when that happens, things are going to get better. And that's what we'll continue on with.
He will bring you together again from all the peoples where the Lord your God has scattered you. Even if your outcasts are at the ends of the world, from there the Lord your God will gather you. From there he will fetch you. And the Lord your God will bring you to the land that your fathers possessed, and you shall possess it. And he will make you more prosperous and more numerous than your fathers. All right,
so not only is there going to be a restoration of our spirit in connection with God, there will be a restoration of the land of Israel, and there will be an elevation, that things will be even better than they were before. And this is, of course, a very important promise that has endured for millennia, that there is always this eventual redemption to look forward to. We're going to talk about how it happens and what's going on here in a few minutes, but I just want to make sure we got this running jump of the narrative. Onward.
Then the Lord your God will open up your heart and the hearts of your offspring to love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul, in order that you may live. The Lord.
Pause real quick. It's a bit of an aside. It's just one of those translation issues that continue to bug a little bit, but it's certainly a reason I can understand. If you look at the beginning of verse 6, it says that God will open up our heart. The term is not open. The first verb of verse 6, this is in chapter 30, is actually to circumcise. That God will circumcise our hearts. This is not a surgical procedure. This is a metaphor of removing a casing, a thickness that is enveloping the heart, meaning that we will be more open and more exposed and more sensitive to God. And really the metaphor is much more powerful when given in the original, but unfortunately, I imagine for many different reasons, but perhaps puritanical ones, the translator did not want to make us think about those sorts of things. But, you know, poetry is powerful when poetry is allowed to be poetry. Onward.
The Lord your God will inflict all those curses upon the enemies and foes who persecuted you. You, however, will again heed the Lord and obey all his commandments that I enjoin upon you this day. And the Lord your God will grant you abounding prosperity in all your undertakings, in the issue of your womb, the offspring of your cattle, and the produce of your soil. For the Lord will again delight in your well-being, as he did in that of your fathers, since you will be heeding the Lord your God and keeping his commandments and laws that are recorded in this book of the teaching, once you return to the Lord your God with all your heart and soul.
All right, so it's a beautiful, beautiful expression. Again, just as an aside, the Hebrew use of the word heart is not talking just about romantic or emotional aspects. The heart as a metaphor in biblical Hebrew poetry is a metaphor for the mind as well as emotion, considered to be one unit, what we would probably call the personality in modern parlance. So when it's saying it's with your heart and soul, we're not leaving out the mind. It is all put in there together. The soul being the spiritual component and the heart being the more earthly component, all together working as one, a well-oiled machine, if you will. And this is a beautiful vision that we will be restored. And it's a vision that we can long for, but it's also a vision that we might feel is naively optimistic. Kind of the, oh yeah, like that's ever going to happen sort of feeling, which is why verse 11 comes where it comes.
Surely, this instruction which I enjoin upon you this day is not too baffling for you, nor is it beyond reach. It is not in the heavens that you should say, who among us can go up to the heavens and get it for us and impart it to us that we may observe it? Neither is it beyond the sea that you should say, who among us can cross to the other side of the sea and get it for us and impart it to us that we may observe it? No, the thing is very close to you, in your mouth and in your heart, to observe it.
All right. So what is this paragraph adding?
It's not beyond your reach. It's inside of you.
What isn't beyond our reach?
The ability to reach this state.
The ability to reach this state, Torah, right? So
The understanding.
Torah, understanding, I think I got that right. I'm just going to call it redemption for that state. Just to reach the state that was described in the previous paragraphs, which I'm going to just put as redemption because it's easier than writing the ability to reach the state. But in the beginning of verse 11, right, ki ha-mitzvah hazot, right, because this mitzvah that I am commanding you this day, there's a feeling that there's some specificity here. And it doesn't say this instruction in the sense of Torah, because it doesn't use the word Torah. And so the question is, what's going on here? And to get to that, we have to take a little detour. And the detour we're going to have to take is heaven. Because that's the first thing that's used, is that it's saying it is not too wondrous for you, right? It is not too far from you. It is not in the heavens. It is not across the sea. Well, why might we thought it would be there? What would we find were we to go there? And Yerach, if you could take one and pass it along. And I apologize for the quality of the printout today. With the internet down, I was left trying to print it on my home printer, which is in need of toner, and then copying it here at the synagogue. So I couldn't just email it in to have it printed on the good printer. So it's a little sketchy. But you know what? For a few days after a hurricane, I think that's still pretty good.
It's readable.
It is mostly readable, yes. All right, so.
I like the large print.
Well, I try to stick to 14-point font because it's. I think it makes it easier for everyone. All right, so shall we start off with the quote from the Talmud about heaven here?
Rav Nachman said, a child who knows whom we bless counts for a zimun.
All right, so what's a zimun?
Three people get together to do the blessings after dinner.
Exactly. When you have 3 or more people for doing the extended invitation to the blessing of Birkat Hamazon. Most people will probably recognize it by the Rabotai Nevarech, right? We only do that if we have 3 or more. And the question is, when are you allowed to count? Now, ultimately, normative halacha comes down on the level that it has to be bar mitzvah or older. But there are other opinions, one of which is, it depends. That for some people, as they are getting older, we can count them earlier. And Rav Nachman is asking this question, and Abaye and Rava are going to discuss this answer that comes from Rava. So
Abaye and Rava were sitting before Rava. Rava asked, "Whom do we bless?" They said, "Rahmana," a reference to God in Aramaic.
all right, so this is an example of Rav Nachman said, as long as you're old enough to know who you're blessing, meaning God, then you're old enough to count in the Zimun. So Rava is putting Abaye and Rava, 2 of what will become the great scholars of the Babylonian era, to the test. And he's saying, all right, so who do we bless? And they both give what would be considered sort of the pat answer, which is Rahmana, right? The merciful one, which is another term often used in Aramaic to refer to God. All right, but does that mean they know whom they bless? Right? Is it just the fact that they can say the title enough to make them properly registered in the ranks of blessers?
Well, where does he live? Rava pointed to the roof. Abaye went outside. Abaye went outside and pointed to the sky. Rava said, "Both of you will be rabbis."
Right. So these were both very good students, and by the way, 2 students that would always argue with each other throughout their adulthood as rabbinic scholars. So the fact that they disagree here and how they answer his question should be fairly emblematic. But there's a notion here of, where does God live? Right? But is that literally true? Right? Does God literally live up there, either in the roof or in the sky?
In the attic.
In the attic?
God is omnipresent.
Right. God is omnipresent because God is not a spatial entity. Therefore, pointing in any direction to refer to God is actually quite limiting to our understanding of God. So what Abaye and Rava are doing here, and what Rava seems to be approving of, is that what they are referencing is not God's location, but God's sovereignty, that God is over them. And that is the understanding of God that is important. Right? It's one thing to simply say there is a God. It's another thing to say God is over us. And the depiction of God as being in heaven is, and the reason why we refer to the heaven as above is because that is the nature of the relationship. It's not the actual location that we would find God in, because we would find God, as Michael pointed out, everywhere. Make sense? All right, so no, don't be upset or object if someone points up to refer to God. As long as they know that God is everywhere, they're simply saying the hierarchy, right? God is up, I'm down. But let's...
I have a feeling from our Avodah Zarah
right, from the Mishnah study about
Avodah
idolatry.
Zarah. If you point there, you might point to something. And this is your God.
Right.
No.
Pointing horizontally is dangerous.
Dangerous, yeah.
Right. There's a lot more things that am I pointing to the chair? Am I pointing to the clock? Am I pointing to the book? There are a lot more things. It's an interesting way of taking it. Yes. Yes. Fewer people get hurt when you point up. But it is important because there were many people who did literally think that God dwelt in the upper realms above us, that somehow that was a location of God, and something that is a natural feeling, but one that we have to make sure we're clear of what we mean when we say up. All right, onward, more about heaven and going up.
From here is implied that men are able to ascend to the moon and stars. And this is called Shamayim.
Right, Shemaim, the heavens.
Shamayim. as it is written in Devarim 4:19, unless you lift up your eyes to heaven and see the sun and the moon and the stars, all the host of heaven. And the Chazon Ish said that this was via the divine name, as Rashi explains in Shagiga 14, that four entered the Pardes, meaning that they ascended to Shamayim via the divine name, and across the sea via ships.
All right. So we have one mystic and one natural answer of what it means to go and try and learn more. When it says go across the sea, that just means using ships. But if you wanted to go to heaven, first of all, is that possible? And and Kanevsky's answer is that yes, going to heaven is possible prior to one's death. And then the question is, well, how does that work? And that's where he's introducing this notion that going to heaven via the divine name, via God's holy name, that is to say, through meditative and mystical practices, is conceivable. Now, the story that he gives of the four who went to Pardes is a cautionary tale, because 75% of those who went didn't do well from the trip. One was insane, one was dead, one lost his faith in everything, and one came back okay. And you'll note also that the one who came back okay was not given any supernatural powers or somehow, benefited beyond the realm of mortal men for having had the journey. So it's not recommended as an action. But they are pointing out that the fact that it says, we will ask who will go to heaven, might make you think that this is a real thing to do. And he's trying to contrast that, no, the ships take you across the sea, the divine name takes you to heaven, not rocket ships. But even still, that's not where we're supposed to be looking. Make sense? Ish? Ish. And by ish, I mean ish, not chazon ish. Sorry. It's that wonderful transliteration. All right. And let's talk one more about long-distance journeys.
The sages say, even if it is impossible to fulfill it, a condition of a get for divorce, eventually, and one stipulates it at the beginning, the stipulation is valid.
All right, so that sounds right. What do you mean if I make a condition for the get and the condition is impossible? What are we talking about? They're going to give some examples.
Or it has been taught, if one says, here is your divorce, on condition that you ascend to heaven or descend to the deep, on condition that you swallow 100 cubit cane or cross the great sea on foot. If the condition is fulfilled, the divorce is valid, but not otherwise.
All right, so if you make a stupid condition when giving a get, which, by the way, is the kind of thing that a really bad husband might do, of saying, here's your get. All you got to do is, right, go to heaven, walk across the ocean, swallow this, 150-foot long stick. That is teasing. And it's not only modern people that can behave badly during divorce situations. And the question is, if you put that kind of condition into the get, does it invalidate the get because it is impossible, or is it valid because it's just a condition? And the first answer we have here is that, sure, if you do it, then it is a real get, and you're done. We can treat this as a normal document, even though what you have now put as a stipulation into it is a total impossibility. Right? It'd be the equivalent of saying, if I write a document to someone saying, I will give you $100,000 if you can eat a living dinosaur, is that a real contract? Like, well, technically it's impossible to fulfill the terms of the contract, but according to this opinion, it is still a contract. For all the good that it's going to do you, it is still technically a valid document. Make sense? All right. Onward.
Rav Judah Bartima said, in such a case, it is a valid divorce. Rav Judah Bartima stated a general rule, that which can never be fulfilled, and he, the husband, stipulates it at the beginning, It is only to repel her and is valid.
All right, so Rabbi Yehuda Bar Tema has a slightly different take on this. He says, no. If the condition is a truly impossible condition, then that does not count as being a condition that would withhold the divorce. Instead, it's as though those lines weren't even there. And so if you say, this is your get if you swallow a 100-foot stick, and obviously swallowing a 100-foot stick is not valid, then according to Rav Yehuda, it would be, this is your get, period. We can just simply delete all of the nonsense, because all of that nonsense is just there in order to annoy the wife. And we don't need to listen to that kind of nonsense. Now, that doesn't mean that people cannot still write a get that has a condition which is unlikely to be fulfilled, and that would still be considered a valid document, and you would still have to wait for the condition to be met, right? So if you say this is your get if you go to the top of Mount Everest, unless you go to the top of Mount Everest, the get does not become active. But if you say this is your get if you go to the moon without a rocket ship, then the get is valid immediately, and the woman is divorced and probably thinking, good riddance to this guy. All right, so that's a little bit about what it means to travel, but why? It's interesting. I hope that you found these little digressions about going to heaven and back, but let's see if we can't find a little bit more of the more immediately relevant spiritual truth that some of our commentators have found in these verses. All right, so Ibn Ezra first.
Not too wondrous, i.e., that is, it is not too mysterious or a superhuman task which you will be unable to perform.
All right, so Ibn Ezra wants to understand, this niflet, what does that mean when it says that this is not too niflet? And you'll see in the translation here, we have the phrase baffling. But the root for niflet is not only baffling, it is a wonder, it is a marvel. It is the same word that we use in the crossing of the sea, in Michamocha, to describe God as one that does wonders, not that God is one who just baffles. So this is not, I think, an error of translation, it's just a difficulty of finding the right English word that matches the Hebrew word. There's sometimes not a one-to-one link up. So what he's trying to say is, what does it mean by this is too wondrous, too marvelous? What he means is, this means it is not too mysterious. It is not a superhuman task that God is asking us to do. Now, we still haven't gotten any closer to figuring out what God is asking us to do, but at least we know that whatever it is he's asking, it is within our capability. Make sense? Okay. Forno, on the other hand, is going to push for a particular definition.
This mitzvah is referring to the command to be wholehearted when doing teshuvah.
Right? So when it says, ki ha-mitzvah hazot, right? This mitzvah is not too wondrous or too difficult or anything else. Forno says this should be read based on the previous two paragraphs. The previous two paragraphs talk about us returning to God, about us fulfilling God's commands, about living according to God's ways. And yes, it talks about then the redemption and all the other parts, but it's that main thrust in our side of changing how we live and of turning aside from the errors of the past. And so he says, verse 11 is just carrying that on. And so therefore we should read, this is not too wondrous, this is not too difficult, this is not too baffling, this is not across the ocean. All of those phrases we should be thinking about are on the theme of teshuvah, of repentance, of what does it mean to return to God. And that then helps fill in the rest of our answers.
Not too wondrous, that is, there is no need to ask prophets. Not too far, that is, you do not need to ask leading Torah scholars of the generation who live far from you. You can easily perform this mitzvah anywhere. All
right, so Sforno's making the point that teshuvah, returning ourselves, getting redemption, all the things that you have described here, of changing, from being on this side where we weren't doing it, to being to this side, it's easy. It's easy. Now, again, I said at the very beginning, perhaps these earlier paragraphs seemed a little naively optimistic. Sforno's driving that home and saying, yes, it is absolutely dead easy to go from not to yes.
It's easy conceptually.
Okay, it's easily conceptual, but that's what he's trying to point out. And that's what he's saying the Torah is trying to point out. But do you think that in order to repent, to change your life, to become a better person, to live according to Torah, you have to travel around the world? Right? Go live, visit some guru on the top of a mountain? Go afflict yourself in some desert? Go seek some spiritual awakening at the foot of some giant waterfall or beautiful tree? No, you don't need all of that. You think you have to invest decades of effort. You have to invest hours and hours and hours of time each day and change your entire life, turn it upside down. I mean, not the bad parts, but I mean just your general way of living. No, it's easy. You don't need a prophet. You don't need a giant journey. This is absolutely something that can be done anywhere, anytime, like that, which means the stumbling blocks are not external. The things that keep us from Torah, that keep us from understanding, the things that keep us from redemption are not outside of us. They're inside of us. Which is...
The rabbi in Israel used to be a comedian.
Mm-hmm.
And he tells people that are not observant.
Right.
Just light a candle Friday night and say the bracha.
Right.
The rest will come later.
Right.
Yeah.
And is that so hard?
No.
Right? Is that too wondrous to do? Right? Do you need a prophet to tell you to light the candles? Do you need to go across the sea to buy the right candle? No. Right? It's not hard. And the only thing that keeps people from lighting candles for Shabbat or doing any of the other mitzvot is themselves. Right? Thankfully, we don't live in a world where people are beating us and threatening us with life and death if we don't break commandments. We live mostly in free societies that allow us to follow the commandments, should we choose. All right, so we're going to read a little section here from Midrash Rabbah, which deals with how easy it is to imagine that it's hard.
The rabbi said, "This fool enters the synagogue and sees them involved in Torah. And he says to them, how does one learn Torah in the first place? They say to him, first he reads in Megillah, either the Megillah or an instructional scroll."
There's a little debate of exactly what was meant by Megillah in this concept, in this text.
Then in the Sefer, Torah. Then in the Nevi'im, prophets. And then in the Ketuvim, writings. And once he finishes the written Torah, he learns the Talmud. And after that, the Halakot. And after that, Aggadot.
See, it's just that easy.
And when the fool hears this, he says in his heart, when will I learn all of this? And turns from the gate. This is what is written. In the gate, he does not open his mouth.
Right. Now, very important in this section of the Midrash, and the Midrash is going to continue with different teachings on this theme, but we'll take them one at a time. The fool doesn't ask his real question of, when am I supposed to do this? He hears the answer and assumes that is too hard and leaves without even asking. That is what makes him the fool. Right? It's not that he's a fool because he asks. It's not that he's a fool because he thinks it's hard. He's a fool because he doesn't bother asking, well, wait a minute. that sounds like I need to go to school for 500 years or study constantly. What do you mean I have to learn the whole Talmud? I mean, that's the prerequisite for being a decent person? And of course, the answer is no. This is the way, but you are already transforming your life from the moment you begin this procedure. Right? From the moment you first start learning, and the moment you first start learning the Torah, you have already transformed your life. You have already gained understanding, you have already gained Torah, you have already helped contribute towards redemption. Yes, the total process of absolutely integrating all of this is a lifetime's worth of effort. But that lifetime absolutely goes on, and it doesn't, and the study of it does not consume you 24/7. It is meant to accompany, to underpin, to support your life. It is not meant to replace one's life. But a fool doesn't bother to ask that. A fool just looks at the curriculum and assumes that they have to do all of it before they start, not realizing that The curriculum is life. This is the way you live, and not a replacement for it. Does that make sense?
The mitzvah is to study Torah, not to incorporate it all. But yes,
eventually you will, right? But it's just starting is enough. To go back to Yerach's example of lighting candles, right? Just begin reading a little, right? That is enough. You're already on the path. You're not waiting for your PhD, certification before you can truly call yourself a changed person. You get that from the first moment you decide to change and take an action which reflects that. And then the study, as Michael says, is meant to go on and on and on as just a process in and of itself which cultivates the soul. And then, of course, we hope will also lead to changes of action by extension. All right, Rabbi Yanai.
Rabbi Yanai said, "To what is this matter comparable? To a loaf of bread which is suspended in the air, presumably from a string from the ceiling. The fool says, 'Who is able to bring it?' And the rational man says, 'Did not someone suspend it there?' And if someone was able to access that space to suspend it, it must be possible for others to access it as well. He brings a ladder or a pole and brings it down. So too he who is foolish says, 'When will I have time to read all the Torah?'"
Right. So, it's like one of those basic anthropological tests. You hang a banana from the string. And if you're a very dumb monkey, then you just go ook ook and jump and try to get the banana and you go home hungry. But if you're a thinking monkey, then you realize bananas don't normally float in the air. So that means somebody put the banana there. And if somebody put the banana there, then I can use tools to get the banana. I know that for many people, when they come into the synagogue and they open up the Siddur and they see page after page after page of Hebrew, it's overwhelming. When they think about the giantness of the Torah scroll, it's overwhelming. When they encounter 3,000 years of Jewish history, it is overwhelming. And they see, like the books that surround us in this library, it's incredible. But each one of these books and each prayer and each word of the Torah was built, was added. And everything that has been built and added was done by people. Not to say the Torah came from people, but it was written by people. And the language was learned by people. And that means the language can be learned by new people. And the books can be understood by new people. And new books will be written by people who once thought themselves unable to write a book. There is nothing that is beyond our grasp when it comes to our religion. There is nothing that is too wondrous, nothing too marvelous, nothing that we need across the sea or a person who says they go to heaven to help us with. It is all within our capability. It's only internally that we keep ourselves from getting the banana. We choose not to bother to bring over a ladder to get that banana. We just think, it's too high, and grunt and walk away. All right, so then.
And he who is rational, what does he do? He learns a single correct chapter every day until he finishes the entirety of Torah.
Which is not very hard. Right? A parak of Torah, if you were reading it just straight without too much additional study, would take you, 5 minutes? Right, with a little bit of study, it might take you 15 minutes. 15 minutes a day to read a slice of Torah with a little bit of commentary. And you'd be able to finish the Torah in no time. And so too the rest of the Bible. And so too the rest of Mishnah and of Talmud and of Agadot and Midrash. It's all there in tiny little bite-sized pieces. Just takes a little bit of time. Now, you who have chosen to come and study, I'm talking to the choir. People who are watching on the YouTube, I'm, again, talking to the choir. But beyond this class, just look for those opportunities to do, to learn, to grow, and realize that it is entirely within our hands. There is nothing that keeps us from doing it. There is no external barrier that prevents us from having the life that is being described in chapter 30. All right, so let's finish off this midrash.
So says God, It is not too hard for you. That is, it is not too hard. And if it is too hard, it is from you.
All right, so this is a little bit of a play on words from the Hebrew, because the mincha can be used as a comparison, meaning that something is harder than you, right? Harder beyond you. But mincha can also mean from you, meaning it is hard because of you, right? The difficulty comes from you, not from that which you try to attain, right? And so it's just really a very clever way of looking at this. And as they finish it off, it says it's that you are not involving yourself in it. Right? The number of people who have said to me, I find the service uninspiring, but who have never taken a moment to study the Siddur outside of the service time. I've never taken a moment to learn some of the songs and the melodies that we sing. People who say the Torah doesn't make any sense. And if you ask them, well, do you have a copy at home? They say no. Like, well, you know, Einstein relativity doesn't make any sense to me either. But that's because I've never studied it. I don't assume that it is nonsense just because it doesn't make sense to me. I assume that the weakness, the shortness is mine, because I have not tried to learn that. And so too with our faith, that something which has endured and grown and been an amazing influence throughout the world for 3,000 years, if there appears to be a shortcoming in it, chances are the shortcoming is from our perspective, not from it. Which is going to be then giving us our final bit of exhortation from the Talmud at the end.
This is in harmony with the following statement of Rav Avdimi Bar Hama Bardoza. What is the significance of the text? It is not in heaven that you should say, who shall go up for us to heaven and bring it to us? Neither is it beyond the sea that you should say, who shall go over the sea for us and bring it to us? It is not in heaven, for if it were in heaven, you should have gone up after it. And if it were beyond the sea, you should have gone over the sea after it.
Right. So, again, using that brilliant rabbinic logic, the fact that the Torah mentions the heaven and the sea as places you might have thought the Torah was and rules them out is precisely because were it to be in heaven or the sea, you would then have been obligated to go up to heaven or across the world in order to get it. By ruling it out, God is saving you time and saying, no, that's not necessary. But every other effort to attain Torah, to attain understanding, to attain redemption, that's on us. And it's not that hard. And it's not external, it is internal. It is not something that we have to go out and overcome. It is something that we have to look inside and overcome. And that is something that I hope we contemplate as we get closer and closer to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, that not only for devoting ourselves to taking the time to learn, to study, and to fulfill the more obvious mitzvot, relations with other human beings and our relations with our family, with our businesses. There is nothing external that forces us to make errors that leave people hurt and wounded, or to force us to be anything less than perfectly honest in our businesses. It is only internal that keeps us from having that level of goodness in our life. And it's not that hard to overcome if we recognize that that is where the problem lies. And the way that we do it is exactly as the Midrash explained, piece by piece by piece. It's just that easy. And you don't even have to call an operator. You don't even have to dial a 1-800 number. You don't have to go online. You just have to make the decision and then choose something to work on. Good? Good.
Thank you.